Thank you for joining me on another episode of She Leads Now podcast, where we help career and entrepreneurial women gain the tools to develop a success mindset, create winning strategies, build collaborative relationships, and take bold action towards creating impact and fulfillment in their lives and careers. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and I'm on a mission to awaken and activate women and emerging leaders so they can tap into their innate leadership ability, elevate their influence, and create the impact they were destined to make. If you're ready to uplevel your confidence, courage, and influence, you've come to the right place. Join me weekly for insights, strategies, and resources to help you grow, develop, and embody the leader you are meant to be, so that you can make the impact you know you are called to make and establish the legacy you've always dreamed. The world eagerly awaits the emergence of your brilliance, impact, and influence. So with that, let's dive into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of She Leads Now. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and we are having another episode of the series LeadHership Reloaded, Reimagining, Redefining, and Rehumanizing Leadership. And so today I have with me the amazing Tiana Sanchez, someone who I've been admiring from afar on LinkedIn for several years now. And so I'm really, really excited to have her on the show. Before we have her share her background, I just want to share a little bit more about her bio. Tiana is the CEO and founder of TSI, LLC, a woman-owned business preparing leaders to achieve next-level results in talent and leadership development. Her company currently manages a portfolio of clients with a combined net worth of over $100 million. For over a decade, Tiana has served as a corporate trainer and business consultant to top leaders in both the public and private sectors across the U.S. She is a #1 best-selling author, producer, and host of a global podcast that inspires thousands of people in more than 26 countries. With that, welcome to the show, Tiana. It is such an honor to have you here.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. And kudos to you for putting together such a phenomenal podcast. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you've accomplished a lot. I mean, there's so much more that I could say to the work that you have done. But if you wouldn't mind, just walk us through your career journey and what has brought you to this place and the impact that you're making today.
Well, I always start with my humble beginnings, which was an employee working at a little known company that actually started in your hometown or your city right now, San Diego, called Hot Dog on a Stick. And I always remember my roots, because if you've ever been to an In-N-Out or a small fast food restaurant, Hot Dog on a Stick is like that. We did hot dogs or corn dogs and lemonade. And I started there at 17 years old. And literally that was my first introduction to what it was like to be a female leader, because my boss was a woman. My boss's boss was a woman. The CEO at the time was a female. And so my roots started very strong with being able to see strong women in leadership positions. And then I didn't realize, Sabine, until I left that environment after 8 years, went into the real world and said, oh, this is not how it is out here. But it was already too late, because I already knew that I could be what I saw. So it was so much for them, because they had to deal with that strong personality. But I left, went into clothing, went into retail, and then landed in the financial industry. And then what happened in 2006, 7, 8? Recession hit, and so did layoffs. And I was on the receiving end of a massive layoff at my company. And I had a decision. And I said, okay, well, what have you been doing your entire career? Hiring, managing, training, developing. Well, maybe you can do that for yourself and help other companies. And so that's what I did. So it's been, I want to say 11 years now we've been in business. And I started on the heels of what one might consider a failure or a loss. And 11 years later, here we are doing phenomenal work for companies all around the country.
That is awesome and amazing. So tell us a little bit more about the work that you do and the impact that you're making in the space around leadership development, DEI.
We help solve complex people problems is the short end of it. It is basically the business of people. And with people, you have all of these wonderful things that make us up, but we're here to help humanize the workplace. And so we have a couple of pillars within the work we do. We focus on professional training and development, where we put together programs for companies. We help facilitate them. We help develop them. Then we have executive coaching, which is really more of that one-on-one type of development, Sabine. So it could be individual leadership coaching or executive for director levels and above. And then we provide, which is really our core product now, is assessments. And so we will do individual assessments on the front end of someone trying to hire a candidate or an applicant. We'll do that before. We'll actually do assessments if the person's in the position to help the development. If they're advancing in their career, we'll do that. And we also help to create evaluations and metrics for companies organizationally. And you talked about DEI. And in 2019, before the pandemic hit, we started really tapping into what a company-wide evaluation or audit looks like. And it is just taken off. It is one of our most requested, I would say, service or product offerings that we do for organizations right now.
That is awesome. So you've written several books, right? We can see it in the back for those of you who are watching this, as well as, yes, as well as some ebooks, right? Some very powerful ebooks. And so I had the pleasure of reading your Awakening or The Awakening book, which I thought was amazing because it really shed light around conscious leadership, right? And what that really looks like in practicality through the case studies and how that applies or is positively impacting the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging crisis we have within our society and within our workplaces. If you wouldn't mind, would you share with us what, according to you, right, according to your thought leadership, what is conscious leadership and how does it show up? How do we recognize someone who is operating in that space?
So conscious leadership, as I look at it, and I've defined it a few different ways, but it is really an intentionality and awareness. It is helping individuals be more aware of people that work with them, understanding their plights, their backgrounds, their history. When I grew up in work, it was all about you don't mix personal and business. When you step through these doors, you leave ego behind, you leave your world behind. That's impossible. You can't tell someone who's, let's say, going through a divorce or who had a loved one pass away that as soon as they walk through this threshold called work, that we got to leave all that behind. And that's an old model. It's an old mindset. And so conscious leadership is taking all of that into account to be more aware. We can't have blinders on. We can't pretend that the world that we live and work in does not exist and it does not impact the people that work for us and with us. And so a big part of that is leaders leading the way, setting the example and doing the work. It's not going to fall in your lap. It's not going to be happenstance. It is effort. It is intentionality. And it is awareness. And so that is a big part of it. And when you be able to identify what a conscious leader is someone that is evaluating practices and policies. It's not saying, hey, we've done it always this way, so let's not try something new. It's saying, no, let's evaluate it and let's figure out what's working, what's not working, what's equitable, what's not equitable, and start really asking the tough questions. And guess what? It does not make one leader popular. It is a very unpopular act to be a conscious leader, but it is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love what you said about the whole mindset around, because I when I came up in corporate, that's what I was told too. Like when you step through these doors, right, whatever you have going on is out, and you are just this professional, and you leave all that at the door. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is that people have said, actually, I don't want to leave me at the door. If I'm going to give all this time and all this effort and all this energy, I'm coming with all of me. I want to feel like the entirety of my being is welcomed here versus this persona. And we as women, like we are quick to compartmentalize, right? Of who we are, the hats or the roles that we're playing to be whoever we need to be in that moment. But as we've seen with the great reshuffle, resignation, whatever we're calling it these days, I feel like there was an awakening for the workforce and women in particular to say, you know what? Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't just be VP. I can't just be CEO or whatever role. I am also a mother. I am also a wife. I am also a caretaker. I'm even a teacher now. Stay a teacher now in so many cases.
All of those
All of those things. Yes. So as we're seeing the shifts in society, we're seeing the shifts and really the demand for these shifts in the workforce. We have 5 generations within the workforce, and the model of leadership is shifting from, or has been shifting from, that command and control style to more so situational leadership, to transformational leadership, to now conscious leadership. I know that for a fact that there are a lot of mid-level, if you will, individuals who they've learned the command and control model, and they've also kind of tried to figure out their own thing. How do we as a society and a workforce, and I know this is a big question, right? How do we collectively adopt a new model of being and a new model of leading in the times that we're in? So I know that's like a convoluted big question, but we're just having a conversation here. So
No, it's a good question, Sabine. And it you have to deconstruct what was learned. You can actually unlearn learned behavior.
mhm,
And I have had many incidents, especially when I've done coaching. That's actually one of the biggest challenges is taking someone who has adopted a certain style of leadership that has been groomed, that has learned over years and years a certain style. Okay. And then trying to awaken that individual by increasing their awareness, demonstrating that guess what? You have new people, new workers, a whole new world and society that the way you led 20 years ago, guess what? Ain't gonna cut it. And that is the biggest challenge because it's now, if you think about like when they were first starting their journey, right? They pick up things along the way, right? Like a buffet. You grabbing a little bit of this, you grabbing a little bit of that, and you picking up things kind of along the way. You get attached to those things. They become yours. You want to hold on to them. And so now someone's coming along saying, you got to let some of those go. And better yet, you need to upgrade. And with that, people have a tendency to want to hold on to what they know, what is comfortable for them, what they've done. And they often fail to see that what you've done or what you're currently doing is not going to work. So when I've encountered that with individuals, especially in coaching, we talk through the scenarios and situations that they're experiencing with the individual. And I have them take a step back and look at it from a human lens, because again, that is not personal, it's business. Leave your, who you are at the door when you cross over this threshold. I got to bring that back. So I bring the humanity back into it. I talk very much about behavior. I talk about perceptions. I talk about assumptions that we often make, and I challenge their leadership style. The situational leadership that you actually talked about is a really great model. There's a couple of different companies that use it. I'm certified to teach one. And I love that model because it teaches the leader how to switch hats based on what the needs are of that individual. And oftentimes those needs might be basic needs like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, before I can establish trust with someone or ask them to complete a task or work on a project, I got to make sure that basic need is met. And if that basic need is, I need to make sure that I feel secure here, that you have my back as a leader, that there's trust here. Let's say that's basic needs. Well, before you asking me to do all this, I need this basic need met. So I'm helping to bring it to an understanding incrementally to them, for them. And it can become a little challenging, but I do feel that having honest conversations, bringing awareness, providing real feedback constructively to individuals will help that shift. Once they reach a certain point, though, sometimes we can find people regressing back to old habits. So that's why this conscious awareness is really important. And it's not just one person's effort, it's a collective effort. So I got to call you out on the table, and not disrespectfully, but if you and I are working together, Sabine, I need to be able to make sure that you and I are aligned with what we're doing. And I need to give you feedback. You need to give me feedback. So this is some of the things that we're seeing, but you cannot manage or lead the way you did 20 years ago and expect to get results and expect to get a dedicated, thriving workforce today.
absolutely. The interesting thing with leadership or human behavior, period, I think this is a period where a lot of us are learning more about just human behavior, mindset, subconscious mind, and patterns and whatnot. I have a heart for those who are in leadership because I know it can be challenging to just make any changes in our lives, right? And so as a leader, if you think about it, or as an individual, period, you've been rewarded for a certain behavior, or you've been rewarded for certain outcomes for the better part of your career. And then now all of a sudden it's kind of like you need to be a different person. And there's this there's this piece about having grace for leaders in leadership roles today, because they're not just learning how to lead differently, they're learning how to be different. And that is a deeper work that requires them doing it inside, right, on their own, and then them having a support and feeling trust, feeling that they have that level of trust to be vulnerable, to say, what, I've been this person and I don't know how to be that person. And so having a circle around them of people who can support them, who can develop them, who can, like you said, call them out on that. One of the things I always talk about is around the subconscious mind, right? And we take for granted how much so much of our lives are based on patterns, how much so much of what we do is just kind of like on autopilot, right? Like when we get in the car and we drive, we're not thinking about where's the ignition, where's the when do I stop, right? And much of that shows up in the way that we show up at work, in the way that we show up in our businesses, in the way that we show up in leadership. And so it's having this opportunity to kind of break some of those patterns day in and day out, us doing the work and then us having people to support us with that. So it's no easy feat. I guess I say all that to say it's no easy feat. As much as in society, I know we want to see quick change and we want to see leaders just like being these amazing people. We know that's gonna it's gonna take decades before we get to that place. What I'd love to hear from you as well as you're working to shift the game and shift the mindset and start to break these old patterns and instill new ones to help support leaders so that they can thrive in their businesses and organizations and certainly their teams as well. How is that impacting this whole initiative around DEI? And I ask that in the context before George Floyd's murder, right? It was acceptable to just be a certain way. Everyone was just who they were, doing what they want to, right? Now in this space, who we were 2 years ago is not who we are today. So how could potentially conscious leadership or adopting that approach impact and help us move away from where we were 2 years ago at a more accelerated pace?
So I want to answer this question, but you really hit on something, Sabine, that I don't want to overlook. And there's two things that I want to mention when you were talking about management, and you mentioned this kind of autopilot. And I'm going to say it right now, but we're going to trademark this: autopilot leadership. I don't know. That just kind of came to my mind because it really spoke to this. You don't even think about it. You just kind of do it because you've done it so long, especially a particular way. But one of the things you hit on, which I think is important, when you have managers in a specific role, and I'm going to come back to your question on DEI, management is the only role, think about it, where you don't have to get a degree, you don't have to have credentials, you don't have to receive a certification, you don't even have to have so many years of, let's say, experience to be promoted into that role. If I were going to be a pilot, I have to accumulate so many flying hours, correct? Because you, I'm sure, would not want to ride on a plane if I only had maybe 10 hours of flight training, right? That's not going to cut it. If I were going to be an attorney, you want to bank so many hours, right? You have to have a degree. If I'm going to be a doctor, you have to go to school, you have to have a residency. And I say all this because when you're talking about management, and I think it was the word human and humanizing that you mentioned, that is a role where you are literally, your business is people management, and you are dealing with people's emotions, behaviors, family, everything, because they bring all of that into the workplace. And if you don't have a psychology degree, have studied years about human behavior, as you talked about, mindset, NLP, everything, in my opinion, to have some of that would equip you to have to be in that management role. But we don't have that. And that's why we get this number where 82% of managers today are miscast. 8 out of 10 managers, for your listeners, if they're in employment, if they're working for a company or have worked, 8 out of 10 managers that work in the company are potentially a miscast. They should not be in that role because they do not have the skills. So when you think of that, it's very weighted in how we don't really look at the importance of how much we need to invest, and the amount of training that is provided to leaders and managers is minimal, is extremely minimal. So, but yet we're asking for so much. We're asking for you to show up and be a counselor, be a coach, do a little bit of therapy too while you're working with, complete this task, work on this project, understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, even if you've never been introduced to it before. And so with that, to your question, and I may ask you to repeat it because as I've been talking, I know you asked a question about how we move from the last 2 years where it's been very accelerated to that. But let me let you repeat it, just to make sure I'm responding to the correct question.
Absolutely. So many great points there. I did not know about that 82% statistic. That is that is really, really scary. And I just think about maybe within the last 5 years, right? Most of the expectations on managers and leaders were around bottom line results, right? And around productivity and around all those things. And yes, they always had some accountability or responsibility for the human beings, but what they were being rewarded for, what they were being recognized for, were those dollars coming in, the productivity, the business, and all that other stuff. And so, again, when you think about it, it's an entire paradigm shift that is happening for the individuals, for organizations, and for society as a whole. But to the question about the diversity and inclusion, right? Following George Floyd's murder in 2020, since then, a lot of progress has been made in terms of understanding these are the challenges that exist for people in society and how that plays out in the workforce, right? We've done a lot in 2 years, but we also know that there's a lot of room for growth and for improvement as a human race within this country specifically and globally as well. With that, how does adopting this conscious mindset or conscious leadership, if you will, conscious mindset that leads to conscious leadership, how can that help accelerate the progress that we've made so far?
Well, and I would even ask your audience to consider how one would define progress. I think we might define progress differently. Some might see progress as, oh, now we're talking about it more so than we've ever talked about it. That could be progress. But then I think back, are we? I mean, because these aren't really new things. Do we define progress by how many organizations now have DEI initiatives, have task force dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is that progress? Some might say yes. Some might say, well, I don't know. So progress probably would be defined differently by some members in your audience. In the Conscious Leadership ebook that I wrote a couple of years ago, we provided this kind of 7-step schematic. It's 7 areas that you want to look at if you're going to take this step, like the awakening is like, okay, I'm raising it. Ooh, I'm finally getting up out of bed, but you got to put one foot outside of the bed. You waking up is one part of it, but then stepping out of the bed is another part of it. So in that 7 kind of step schematic, and I'm not going to give all of them away because I want to encourage your audience to head on over to the site and take a look at it. But we talk about, number 1, assessing and evaluating policies and protocols within your organization. I can remember, Sabine, like in 2020, I got a call from a guy. He worked at a company. I want to say it was a pretty affluent Caucasian neighborhood, city. And I say that not disrespectfully, but according to him and his words. And they were having some difficulty hiring a lot of diverse candidates and applicants. And I remember him and I talking on the phone and discussing certain things. And he said, Tiana, you can't believe what I just found in one of our policies. It still had on the books that women had to wear stockings to work. Yes. And this was 2020. And he said, I could not believe that was still in there. It's, and I say little, but I don't really mean little, but when you think things like that hidden in between policies that have been on the books, your company's been around for 50, 60, 70 years. When was the last time you evaluated policies and practices? Sometimes things we have in our handbooks, employee handbooks, professional attire. Well, what does professional really mean? A professional hairstyle. Well, who are you talking about? What kind of professional hairstyle are we talking about? If I have cornrows, if I have braids, if I'm wearing a natural style, for a Black person or a person of color, I can wear that professionally. But see, those are little words and things that were weaved in years and years and years ago, and we don't challenge that. We just accept it, and that's the way that it is. So one of them is evaluating those types of policies and practices. The other one is looking at what kind of training you have. Now, I'm a trainer. I love to train and facilitate, but I'm here to tell you, training is not the end all be all. You cannot rely on trainers and facilitators to come in and fix your problems. We are to come alongside you, partner with you to be a supplement for what you're already doing. So if you have an initiative that we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z, hey, a part of that initiative means we're going to have some facilitators. A part of that means we're going to have some of this. And a part of that means we're going to have some of that. We're to come alongside you. So you also have to understand what kind of training is necessary for your staff. And also understand that there are going to be people where you're going to have to push back. The author of White Fragility talks about we need to develop a stamina. We need to have increased stamina to have these kinds of conversations. And so part of that means you're going to be unpopular. You're going to have to push back. You're going to have to stand your ground. You're going to have to be firm on those things because it's the right thing to do. So I've given you a few, but in the ebook, there are kind of like this 7-step schematic that you can look at if you are really, truly wanting to take more intentionality behind that. Like you've awoken, but now I got to step one foot out of the bed and I got to get my other foot out of the bed. That is where you can go to look at some ideas and tips to do that.
Absolutely. And we'll include that book in the show notes as well. One of the things that you said, the prior question here is around leadership and the lack of development that they get in reality, right? And I feel like that's the same. That could be the same case for people who are in business too, right? Like we start businesses because we have a passion, we have a calling, we have a gift that we want to share with the world, and we start just sharing it, and then this thing starts to grow, and now all of a sudden we have to be this other person. What I've seen throughout my career is that, or what I've always believed was that leaders were the most underserved in organizations. Reason being, the people who got executive coaching, if you will, were the C-suite or the C-level or the people who were one foot out the door, and this was like their last saving grace. Meanwhile, mid-management didn't get that development. Like I would say over the last couple of years, more and more companies have been actively investing, but you still look at it like, is it really enough? I had a situation not too long ago where I was asked to put together this leadership development program for some individuals who are going to be new supervisors. And the feedback that I got was more so, oh no, we just kind of wanted like some basic training, right? And so you have things like LinkedIn Learning and you have these like other pieces that are great. They're supplemental, but they're not going to transform someone into embodying a different way of being. So how do we, and especially for those who are listening too, how do we continue to advocate and continue to bring that forth and bring that to light that, hey, just like you can't put one product or one commercial out one time, right? And expect like a sea of people to come buy your products as a business. You can't send someone to a 4-hour training on leadership and expect them to come out this superior leader where everyone trusts and everyone wants to follow. So what are your thoughts, or what are you doing to advocate to show them, hey, this is the ROI in investing in your people when it comes to leadership development, when it comes to basic communication skills, when it comes to building cultures in which people feel like they can bring their whole selves to the organization?
I want to say it's both parties involved, meaning the person who's on the receiving end of it and the person giving it. And honestly, it actually can start, and I'll dive into what are some of the things that we're doing, but it starts when you're interviewing for a job. One of the questions that you ask should be, what are some of the things you do to develop your employees? If I choose to advance in my career within this organization, how will I be supported? I don't think anyone should leave their future in someone else's hands. If I am an employee and I'm choosing to advance in my career or I get promoted, I'm not going to be waiting for them to come to me to offer me, here's what you need, here's da da da. I'm going to be seeking and pursuing that. So that's number one. Now, if you are in an organization and you again, you're looking at how can I be more supportive of those on my team. Number one, as an organization, you need to have spend. You need to have allocated funds for development. Okay. On average, I want to say the numbers a few years ago were somewhere between $750 to $1,100 per person in the company, meaning that was their professional development spend for 1 year. I am grateful to the clients, and I have a few of them that actually have money set aside for their employees in their development. And development can look like several different ways. It can be a blend of LinkedIn Learning. It could be a blend of some internal coaching or online classes that you have. It could be different kinds of one-on-one conversations. It doesn't have to be, give me a status update on the project. It could be, I want to talk to you about your career. It could be external coaching within there. So professional development can look like a few different things. So some can be inexpensive and some can be costly. But when you have a spend for it, you can budget it accordingly. Okay. The other thing we need to consider when we're developing and providing that for individuals is looking at not just the today, but the tomorrow, like the succession plan. I see this individual as someone who can take on my role. When I was a young manager, it always made me really happy when people are like, I want your job. I'm like, okay, that's good. You should, if that's where you want to go, I'm gonna help you get there. Sometimes people get threatened when they feel like someone is aspiring, and so they will halt them. They will do it even unintentionally. They will create the ceiling that did not exist before. And so that is where we also have to self-check. If you look at a whole host of leaders and you look and say, okay, I want to look at those individuals and see which ones have actually promoted people within the last 5 years. And if you start seeing, well, there's one person on your team that ain't really promoted anybody, I would start to question, well, what's happening there? How are you not developing? What kind of support are you providing? So there's things that we can begin to look at internally to see if there's some gaps on how we're continuing to develop our managers and leaders. And here's the other thing. Some people don't want a leadership management role, and that's okay too. They can be the best sales rep, project representative ever. As soon as you put them in that leadership role, they may not thrive. They may not want that. And that's where we have to consider it's okay, but you also need to make sure that you're giving those that do want that opportunity time, attention, and training, attention and intention and training to get into that role. And it is never ending, Sabine. It needs to be like a living, breathing thing. It's like you just don't stop development. Like you just don't ever stop it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we experience that as entrepreneurs, right? Because we know the minute we stop developing and stop growing, then so does our clients and so does our business. It's the how do we transfer that into corporate America? I mean, even when I was in corporate America, I was always like, if there was a development, if there was a training, if there was whatever, like I was doing it, right? When I came into entrepreneurship, I had to take it up even a notch further in the amount that I invest in my own development. I think that that's another piece too. When I was in corporate, I was content with whatever development programs or opportunities that were presented to me that the company was paying for, right? It wasn't until I was getting ready to launch my business that I was like, oh, let me invest in a coach, right, to teach me business because I've never done business before. Then it was, let me invest in a coach to teach me sales. Let me invest in a coach to teach me this. And so I also think that, to your point around owning your own development, that there is a transition when it comes to employees as well in how they see the responsibility and the accountability for their own development. And so yes. I don't know about you, but I have clients who are in corporate, and whether their companies don't support it or whatnot, they are now willing to say, hey, I'll take the money out my own pocket because I want to be better. And I think that that's just as much as we're advocating for leaders, to people who are, I should say, people who are in leadership positions to get development, to get training, to get the support that they need. I would also say the same thing goes for employees, right? If you want to develop and you look around and the opportunities aren't there, or the training or the model or whatever is not there in the organization, don't be upset about it, right? Like, you still have agency, like you can still get the development and the training that you want and that you need. I remember when I first started corporate, I was told, I don't know, within the first month, like I had this real interesting manager, we'll call him that. And he was just like, you own your own development. Like this is yours to develop. And so with that mindset or being given that, even though the way that it was shared was not the best, but it also gave me this sense of accountability that, oh, okay, so if I want to make it up to the C-suite, I got to figure it out. Not on my own. I had to figure out, how do I build mentors? How do I partner with people to be my champion, to be my sponsor, to create my, what I like to call the success circle, right? Those are things that I had to kind of figure out when we're coming into corporate America, coming out of school. That aspect of building your career or building your leadership wherever you want to take it, it's not taught. It's not taught in schools. There is no class that says, hey, you got to build your network, or hey, you got to build your success circle, or hey, you got to build this. We come into it with a mindset often, especially if you're first generation, perhaps women, head down, do the work. Someone's going to notice you. Someone's going to pay attention to you. Someone's going to tap you on the shoulder for that opportunity. And we're seeing that people are awakening to the truth of, actually, that's not true. I'm just going to get more work and be resentful that I'm not advancing in the way that I want to be. And so that transitions us into, as we move forward as women, right? I'm a firm believer that leadership is not tied to just the title or the role that you're playing in an organization. But as women, as we've awakened to the truth that we can advocate for ourselves, we can learn and develop in the way that we want to. How do we help them shift away from the doers to having this more broad view or vision of how they can make an impact in the organization, regardless of where they sit in the organization?
One of the things when I was working, I would create a praise file. Every email or thank you card or accolade that I received from someone, colleague or supervisor, I started to hold on to those. And I encouraged other people to do that, because if not me, who's going to do that? So let's say I do want to take that leap of progression and career advancement. I now have a plethora of things that I can share that advocate for why I should be considered for this particular role. So it is defining leadership different. What I think is so funny is that all the skills that women have been, let's say, belittled for or have been talked about for, the nurturing, the listening skills, the compassion, the empathy. Isn't that funny how all of those skill sets are now being talked about and in demand, especially over the last couple of years? I remember doing an interview on KTLA and we were talking about empathy. And it was something that I was sharing, how not every leader in organizations are as empathetic. They're not really able to demonstrate that level of empathy. And I said, it's something that can be learned, but it is something that women naturally possess. Most women, okay, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but most women. I said, isn't that funny? So we often possess these skills already that have been on the back burner, and you have to bring your own. Some people say you got to make your seat at the table, create your table, bring your own seat at the table, or maybe make an entirely new table and invite people there. Whatever that thing is for you, you can carve out your own path. But I would say, as a woman, and I don't know if I'm just unique in this way, because I've been told that I've been intimidating. I've been told that I am aggressive. I've been told that I'm articulate. And I guess that's a compliment. It's a little bit of a trigger word for me, but we'll leave it there. So with that being said, I truly advocate for myself, and women have to be advocators for each other, and not look at someone else. Sabine, if I see you, how can I help you? There's enough room in this space for both of us to shine. When your light shine, that doesn't dim mine. That means we both shine in. And so it doesn't, we have to see each other as allies. And that's another way of allyship. A different kind of way to look at allyship is looking at how we advocate for women in the work environment. And will we see that change, that gap narrow in our lifetime? I don't know if we'll see more women elevate. What I do see, though, happening, and you can agree to this because you talked about it already, Sabine, is more women starting their own businesses. more women becoming entrepreneurs and small business owners. When I tell you that number has continued to increase over the last decade, and I'm talking women of color, these and all women really have massively increased. And so women are saying, well, hey, maybe I can't get it here at your Fortune 500 company, but I'm going to start it on my own. I'm going to be the CEO and founder of my own company. And I do see that happening. So that could be also another avenue.
I love what you were sharing. I usually call it a brag book, right? Of all of your
That's good.
accomplishments that you keep. One, so that you don't get to performance review time talking about what did I do all year, right?
Right.
And also for those who may be in entrepreneurship or just a challenging environment, not every day is going to be a great day. And sometimes having that brag book to look at the successes when you might be in the midst of what feels like failure, that can be invigorating, that can be motivating and encouraging for you there as well. And then the other piece
Yes.
around women just leveraging their natural abilities to lead. I feel like, or I believe, leadership is innate. It's something that has been created as part of who we are, and there's no. It's not about removing the other gender, if you will, from their spaces. It's figuring out, okay, well, their leadership shows up this way, right? This is their strength in that. As women, these are our strengths. How do we collaborate? How do we bring together versus us feeling like one is more dominant because it's more respected because society says. I shared with you before that this is why I created this series, is because I do feel in our society as a whole, a space has been created that says, women, we need your natural talents. We need you to come alongside those in leadership to lead. Now, the question is, how will we answer the call, right? In many cases, we are answering the call, as you mentioned, starting our own businesses, commanding seats, creating our own seats and whatnot. But I still feel like there's this push, still this wave, if you will, of women awakening to, oh, wait, my empathy, my nurturing, my emotions, all of that matters. That actually is leadership, or that is me demonstrating leadership. And I don't need to hide that. I don't need to reserve that. I don't need to whittle away in a corner, if you will, and be resentful that I, quote unquote, wasn't tapped on the shoulder, wasn't giving a seat.
No, absolutely. Everything that you're saying, and it definitely is applicable to the women of today, the women of tomorrow. I constantly like to stay, and we know we have Women's History Month coming up in March, and usually there's a theme every year. And honestly, this is the first year, Sabine, that I actually don't know what the theme is. Usually, I'm pretty good at knowing what the themes are, but there's efforts behind individuals that want to make those changes and want to make that collaboration, as you talked about, regarding different leadership styles. We need to continue to not let it fall by the wayside. There's so many, I hate to call them issues, but there's so many things that we have to be mindful of: women's issues, people of color issues, fair and equitable thing. There's so many different things. And so it can get overwhelming. And so you may have listeners that are like, oh my gosh, there's so many things. I'm a Latinx female who owns her own company, or an African-American woman who works for a company, considering. And so you may have women of those, and they're thinking like, oh my gosh, there's so many things I have to consider and think, but breathe, take a step, tackle one at a time, prioritize, figure out where you are today, because it can get a little overwhelming. But I think what your podcast is seeking to do is to provide insight, information, resources, and even help to encourage individuals on with your podcast. So with all of that being said, again, thank you. I appreciate being able to talk to you about this. And so I'm going to give it back over to you, and you let us know where we go from here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So 2 quick questions for you, right? You've done a lot. You are continuing to do a lot and pave the way for people who are moving into leadership and moving into their awakening, if you will, in their consciousness. As you look back to a younger version of yourself, or as you look back across your life, right? If you can go back and give advice to a younger version of yourself, what might that be?
The younger version of me was very sassy. And the younger version of me was probably not very patient and kind of moved to the beat of her own drum. And I would probably encourage the younger me to be more open to having others come alongside her to help get her to where she was. I was very much an individual, very independent, very much to myself. Believe it or not, I am an extrovert. At least that's what the report says. But very independent. And I would have liked to say, it's okay. You won't do things all by yourself. It's okay to allow others to help and support you. I've learned that since then, but the younger version of me did not know that. So that's what I would tell her.
Love that. And then from a legacy perspective, right, looking forward, right, when you get to look back and you're on the beach somewhere and you're looking back at everything that you've accomplished, what is the narrative that you want to be able to speak to around the work that you've done and the impact that you've made?
I would like for people to see the work that we've done as a part of, and I'm not going to say a movement, but a part of helping people be better people, a part of helping to bring awareness and understanding in the workplace specifically. I was a young manager, and so I really do have a heart for managers. I really do have a heart for first-time managers, for mid-level managers, for leaders that otherwise don't know how to lead or could lead better. And so I want the work that we've done and what we're continuing to do to be seen as that, and that there's some kind of that there's an impact where someone was able to change the way they thought about a situation, change the way they thought about their mistakes and failures, change the way they thought about approaching someone with more humanity in the work environment. So that would be the legacy in that I would like to have accomplished looking forward.
Awesome. And so as we wrap up here, Tiana, where can the audience get in touch with you if they've been listening and they're like, oh my gosh, I need to meet this woman. I need to connect with her and her business. How can they do so?
Yes. So we just launched our brand new site. We're excited about it. You can literally find me at TianaSanchez.com, and that is TIANA and then Sanchez with a Z.com. There is a ton of information there. You can look books, you can look at upcoming things that we have going on, resources. So that is the best place. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn, also Instagram. So you can look at all that information as well.
Awesome. And we'll include all of those links in the show notes. Tiana, this has been such a rich conversation. I could keep talking to you for a whole nother hour, but I know you're busy and you got stuff to do. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insight and dropping these gems of practical applications that leaders, those who are listening, can begin to take for themselves and for their teams and their organization. So with all gratitude, thank you so much. And for those of you listening, please be sure to check out the show notes, connect with Tiana, let her know that you heard her on the She Leads Now podcast. And I will be back next week with another amazing woman who is plowing and paving the way for the next generation of leaders. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of She Leads Now. If you found today's episode helpful or got a piece of insight that you plan to implement in your business or organization, I would love to hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Sabine Gideon, that's my handle, and send me a private message. Or feel free to go ahead and leave a review on either Apple or Spotify. I also invite you to share this episode with anyone in your network who you think might benefit from this content. Lastly, be sure to check the show notes and the description below for links to resources, including relevant downloads, articles, and any upcoming training. Until we chat again, have a blessed and powerful week.